Hi, everyone. I'm Valentina Flores, CEO of Red Sentry, and this is the Ctrl-Alt-Secure podcast where we talk all things cybersecurity. And really excited for today's conversation because it's around a topic that's coming up more and more and more. And I think there needs to be a lot of education around it. I'm excited to have two experts here today to talk about med devices, pen testing around FDA submissions, and all of that seemingly confusion around it. So excited to break it down and get some real insight here. So today I have two experts here. I have Madison Morrow from Blue Sages, and I also have Farshad Esnaashari. And I'm really excited to just get their backgrounds, hear what they have to say, and yeah, get started. So Madison, if you want to lead off and kind of give your role and what Blue Sages does.
Yeah, thanks, Valentina. Really excited to talk about this today. So, Madison Morrow, Director of Business Development for Blue Sages. I support our team internally with project management. I support our customers through account management. But our team is focused exclusively in the medical device industry and providing engineering services to our clients. We've been operating for the last 25 years with quite a few global manufacturers. But then over the last several years, we've really started to work more in the startup space. And that's brought us to get to know Red Sentry and to be able to support our customers with cybersecurity and the growing regulations surrounding that. So I'll leave off there for now.
Yeah. So your clients span all the way from SMB all the way up through enterprise.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, awesome. And then Farshad, if you want to give your background and your expertise.
Yes, hi everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm a medical device full lifecycle consultant. I've been in industry for over 30 years. Worked in large companies such as Medtronic for many years, and lately I've been focusing on cybersecurity, primarily on the architectural side and risk management. And things have changed quite a bit over the last couple of years. Excited to share my thoughts and what I've learned during these 2 years.
Yeah, it's been changing so much, and it's like it's a whole new world for so many companies that have never had to really think about this before. And so I think it's important that we have these conversations and just kind of break everything down. So, obviously the FDA has become a lot more vocal about cybersecurity in med devices lately. Good thing in my biased opinion, right? What do you think is kind of driving that shift?
Obviously, with the huge number of connected devices and the increase there is posing more of a significant risk for patients and their continued care. So, with that, the FDA is becoming a little more proactive in their approach to encouraging startups to consider cybersecurity from the start. And that is a role that we've played with our customers as well, is really encouraging those cybersecurity best practices from the start of design and really being mindful of that approach. And yeah, I'll let Farshad continue on there.
Yeah, I think that's just to add to that. I think FDA recognizes that you know companies don't necessarily have cybersecurity built into their processes. So if you read the guidance, the very first thing they talk about is think about an SPDF, and that's a secure product development framework. And they say you don't have to use that, but you need to come up with something equivalent to that because they recognize that it tends to be a bolt-on at the end. And I think that's a concern because it just is more difficult once the product is in the field to do patching and securing. So I think that they're becoming more vocal about forcing that into the processes.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean it solves so many future problems if you do it earlier on.
Yeah,
That being said, we've all been a part of SMBs and you have 1,000 things on your plate as you're trying to build this thing, and security always gets pushed to the back burner. So I do
yeah.
think that more important parts of it is like, listen, this is going to save you time. It's going to make your product better. It's just do it proactively. And that's part of the message we try to push for sure. So what is, for those like not familiar with the FDA guidance or just kind of jumping into it for the first time, what are some of the key takeaways for what they're asking for right now?
Yeah, I think the big thing we just talked about is integrate the cybersecurity into your processes, SPTF or something like that, something similar to that. Use guidance, NIST, or IECs. Maintain an actionable SBOM. I think people think you just having an SBOM is enough, but I think you need to have something that you take action on, constantly monitor it, take action, looking at fixes and issues, and then ensure full traceability from threat analysis to controls to test. I think that's another one that they emphasize in VNB. And the other component that I think the key takeaway is that you need to have a clear post-market vulnerability management plan. I think that's also something that they're expecting you, not just because you've done with testing and you're releasing the product, you're not done. You need to make sure that while the product is in the field, you have a patch management, vulnerability management plan, which is clear about when you're going to do it, how often, what is your process for managing those more vulnerability, how you decide what's being fixed and what's being delayed and all.
And, the compliance frameworks are so diverse. There's some where you can just literally check a box and they assume you're telling the truth. And then there's others that are looking at every single piece of your code. For the FDA, what are companies having to submit? Like, is it just like, hey, we're doing these things? Are they having to show evidence? What's that structure look like?
Yeah, clearly you need to demonstrate that you are following the process, that you've done cybersecurity in the architecture level. And then they're expecting to do threat modeling. I think I've heard this several times from people about, well, we're doing some kind of a risk management. I think you need to make sure that you are doing threat modeling. There are different methodologies out there, but you do need to incorporate that into your risk management. And then making sure that you demonstrate that you've done that threat modeling, demonstrate that have gone through from threats to controls to testing. You have a full traceability. They want to see that traceability in your submission. They want you to have like I said before, have some kind of vulnerability management plan. What are the residual, defects or anomalies in your product? And have you gone through an assessment of impact of that to not just the patient safety, but from a security perspective, how is that affecting you? And then making sure that your documentation is fully representing all of that. Your SPOM needs to be in place, and it can't be just a shallow SPOM. You need to go down the details. What are the products you're using, which are soup? What are the products you're using? And then in testing, have you done static analysis? Have you done dynamic fuzz testing? And then more important than anything else, some kind of a pen testing. You need to demonstrate that you've done a offensive penetration testing to demonstrate that your product is withstanding the threats from outside world.
So I assume Blue Sages is kind of helping clear that up, like what you need, helping them produce that. How does Blue
Yeah.
Sage fit in?
Yeah. So, we're heavily focused in software best practices, and with that is, cybersecurity and testing and documentation to support all of those activities. When we get engaged with a client, specifically startup, we will go through an entire list, per the FDA guidelines of all of the documentation that needs to be, gathered and put together for these submissions, and helping support in whatever way we need to with that, whether that's providing templates for those companies or using their own templates and just going through their documentation that they already have and refining and helping educate as well to hand those activities back to the client. But also with that is tooling. And I think customers of ours can get intimidated, right? Especially with like threat modeling, for example. There's all these tools on the market and fancy ways to go about these activities. We've seen and supported customers doing it with Excel spreadsheets and Word documents. So, and then there's, multi-$1,000 tools that can help with these activities as well. So there's a lot of flexibility in there, being mindful of budget constraints, but that is an area that we're really passionate about, is starting from day one in design, helping make sure that these customers and companies are set up for success.
Yeah, no, I think it's so important. And I know, I feel like there's this, whenever compliance enters a new field, not that it's new, I mean, they've always been under healthcare and HIPAA and some other things, but whenever
Agree.
something like this is introduced, it's kind of like, now someone's like policing you and it's like compliance gets a bad rep.
Yeah.
But I think there's a misunderstanding around hackers specifically that hackers only care about you if you have millions of dollars. And it's like, well, that's not true
Right.
because medical devices are one of the best examples of if I was a hacker and I wanted to really disrupt or really hold hostage, I mean, medical devices are one of the biggest attack vectors, right? So I think
Yeah.
it's so
Mhm.
important that, companies when they see compliance, see it as more than just a check the box. Like there's a reason these things are in place and like everyone's here to make sure that your product is secure and your, future patients and people using this device are secure. So I think med devices more than almost any other industry have this intrinsic motivation where you have to take security seriously and the compliance really help in that for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And the definition of a connected device has changed too, right? Where it used to be, if it's connected to Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, that was a connected device. But now it's really expanded into, most medical devices have some type of connectivity.
Yeah, and even I mean the term threat modeling and the term pen test and all of these terms can be so vague depending on not only the compliance framework, but the specific person looking at the evidence. And that can make it really hard for companies when they're trying to figure out what they need. And then everyone just always tells them, well, it depends. And like that's a
Yeah,
frustrate
Mhm.
as a user who goes through
exactly.
audits, frustrating. But I mean, that's why you have to have kind of these experts in the field to kind of walk you through and just kind of guide you through it. What are the common mistakes, I guess, you're seeing the most right now around like submissions, cybersecurity, any of that? Anything you want to point out?
Good question. Actually, just recently I worked with a client. A few of these are, late cybersecurity, paying attention to cybersecurity after your product is almost being completed. We had just an example of a client that was struggling with that. Shallow SBOMs, they didn't really have a complete SBOM. They were saying, well, we're out of time. We don't have to get all these details. Is all these details necessary? And I kept saying, look at your risk and all of that. One of the biggest ones are missing traceability and also in pen testing. They had done pen testing, and I encourage people to do pen testing as early and as frequently as you're allowed to do, because just doing at the end is not enough. And so they've done some pen testing, they found some things, they may have fixed things, but they couldn't really trace back to what was fixed. So those are the common mistakes that I've seen happen in the field. And usually it's startups that do those kind of things, but bigger companies are wising up as well because they realize how expensive it is to wait until toward the end to, find things that are, could potentially cause delays to their submission.
Yeah, and I mean, there have been a ton of enterprises who have a cyber attack and then they had gotten a pen test 6 months earlier and just hadn't prioritized the fixes yet. So, and for everyone listening, SMB or otherwise, it's not a judgment, it's not a morality thing. Like, you know, everyone starts this process at some point, and like Farshad said earlier, it's not a finish line. Like, there's not a point where like now you're secure. It's a journey that evolves so much over time, and it's just figuring out what that starting point is. And to Madison's point, maybe the starting point is just listing some stuff out on an Excel sheet and then kind of evolving from there. But you have to just start having this conversation and start putting this into your culture. Just as often as you're talking about budget and revenue, you should be talking about cybersecurity within your product. So, it's just really having these conversations is the first step.
Absolutely.
What about, I guess, so you mentioned they should start earlier, obviously. How early is early? Like when should this practice kind of start in an ideal world that is both practical to the business operations and secure?
I would say at the architecture level, when you're first starting to have an idea about the product, and in medical devices, a lot of the products tend to be derivatives, anyways. The enhancements of things, but nevertheless, if it's even if it's a new product, think that from the time you're putting pen to paper for design, you need to think about security, because security needs to be a feature built in your product, cannot be bolt on. I mean, that is an expensive way to approach it. Um, you know, do early threat modeling. You know, that really helps you as you design. What are the things you need to put in architecture in your design that would, you know, eliminate the need for you to later on expose be exposed to threats and, you know, have to do pen testing to try to fix it. So do that from the very early beginning. And it's amazing how easy it is to think about those things early on versus, you know, when you've gone down the path of having things designed and coming back and saying, well, no, I have to redo this part. A good example is medical devices, you know, are a little bit unique. Think of a, you know, a defibrillator sitting in a building. If you have to, you need to think about how you're going to keep this secure. Well, certainly authentication and login is a difficult thing to do, right? I mean, you cannot expect someone to come in and, you know, put in a login. But there are many different ways you can address that early on. You know, maybe you know, some kind of a biometrics or something like that, or perhaps you know, thinking physical security for that. You know, things like that that you can think early on, so you don't have to come back and, you know, be challenged by issues that arise late in your product development.
Yeah, and not everything is a digital solution. Like you said, physical security is
Exactly.
as well. And I think, yeah, I think that's really important to point out. And I come from the government sector, and so healthcare is similar in a lot of ways where especially when you're talking about hospitals or things like that. So you can't set up these tools to work in the ideal setting because that's never going to be what the reality is. So yeah, you have to have kind of that pre-mortem that you were talking about, like figuring out what's going to break, how it's going to get attacked, having that conversation, and just find the most twisted negative person on your team who's always being devil's advocate and just be like, "Hey, be devil's advocate for a whole meeting and just figure out all the ways this could go wrong and let's start to fix them."
Exactly.
Madison,
And I think FDA does exactly. And I think FDA does, to add to that, FDA does expect that there are some realities that you have to deal with. It isn't so much that they want to think you to force you down, you know, unreasonable solutions, but rather, like you said, have people really challenge themselves and think, being devil's advocate, being external threat actors, to think through all of that and, you know, reasonably assess that. And, you know, you may have some residual risks that are still acceptable given the cost benefit analysis that you've done. So I think that's what they want. They want that process to be done. They want you to walk through that process.
for sure. And I mean, when we deliver pen tests, you're not going to have a perfect pen test. Like you're going to have vulnerabilities and that's part of the process. And they want to make sure that you're fixing those and taking them seriously. And like you said, it's more about the process than it is about the specific results. So Madison, what's your advice for startups who are kind of trying to balance this speed and innovation with compliance and security? Sometimes they feel like they're battling entities. What's your advice for that?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, if somebody's watching this and they're already well into development, they're approaching testing, they haven't considered cybersecurity, um, it's not the end of the world, right? I mean, we want to come in and help support however we can. So I think really the idea here in starting these conversations more um, is to help with that moving forward, right? Because this is new for a lot of folks. And so I think, yeah, being able to start the conversation now will hopefully help companies in the future. And then I think partnering with experts like Red Sentry, partnering with, I'll shout us out for sure too, Blue Sages, but partnering with a group that's an expert in this area or in these areas is really important when considering budget. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to bring in someone full time to a company like this long term. And it more makes sense to partner with an expert to come in who can be flexible with their time, can avoid that learning curve to save on time and budget, especially being able to come in right away immediately and hit the ground running and go with some of these tasks and activities that need to happen. So I guess that would be my best advice for some of these companies is try to find a partner that's an expert in the space and talk to a lot of people, network. I think that's the biggest role that we can help support our customers with.
Yeah, especially when you're a small team. I mean, you can't be an expert in compliance
Yeah.
and testing and cybersecurity and development and revenue and marketing, and I mean, it's unrealistic.
Right.
So, yeah, I
Well,
think it
yeah, I mean,
makes.
some of the oh, I'm sorry.
Go for it.
Didn't mean to cut you off there. Well, some of the companies we're working with have, 3 people on their team, right? And so being able to bring in a cybersecurity expert full time is just unrealistic. So being able to speak with folks like yourselves at Red Sentry or Farshad or others in the space is huge and can be really valuable.
Yeah, I think it's a unique
Yeah, I would
challenge.
add to,
I was gonna say it's a unique
sorry
challenge
about
that
that.
med device companies face because usually when we're testing environments that have as sensitive of a nature or as complex of a device as these devices, the teams are a lot larger. And med devices are kind of this unique area where the exact same tool could be being built by 2 people or 10 people or like 100 people. And so it really does depend on the team and what their resources are, and so I think that's a really good call out that med devices are kind of in this weird space sometimes. What were you saying, Farshad?
Yeah.
I just wanted to add to that, just, focusing on the high risk area is something that small companies could do that. I mean, I think a lot of times they're worried too much. Like Madison said, they're a very small team. They're constrained for time. But we really kind of settle them down saying, let's just focus on the highest risk areas because I think that's where FDA is going to come in. The very first thing they're going to do is start at the high level. When you look at a submission, they usually start that way. And then, outsourcing, specialized testing, such as working with West Century, I think that's an awesome suggestion. And then I think do maintain some kind of a lightweight, secure product development framework because you want to have something that you are following that, if the questions come up that you have. FDA very much wants to say, well, have you following your processes? And then, that way you have some kind of a foundation to rely on when you're defending your submission.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that I harp on all the time is something so easy that I just wish every company would do is like, you're setting up for 2026 right now. Put an hour on your January calendar to do a tabletop exercise and have a few people from your team there talk through like, hey, someone took this device over today, what would we do? What are the next steps? And even just being able to show the minutes from that meeting can go a long way in a lot of this evidence and just showing and it can give you the roadmap. Like you don't have to go from 0 to 100 tomorrow. It's just kind of starting that process, documenting it. Like you said, a lot of people have conversations, but if it's not documented, that does nothing for you.
Yeah,
So just keeping
exactly.
that keeping that mindset as you're kind of going into 2026, like, where should you start? Like, go ahead and put it on your 2026 planning, start road mapping it out and get with companies like Blue Sages that can kinda work you through before it's time to submit and now you're kinda scrambling, like, what should the roadmap be of this? And, we mentioned obviously this is kind of new-ish in general. Um, the other thing that everyone's asking about is obviously AI, and how are you seeing that play into med devices? How frequently is that being? Because in SaaS and other industries, I feel like every company has it everywhere. How is that playing into the med device space?
Yeah, I think there's two aspects of that. One aspect is, okay, AI is going to provide another attack area. So for the cybersecurity professionals, testers, and designers, it's just going to be another thing coming at you because the threat actor is going to use AI to more frequently, to increase their power of attacking. So that's one aspect. From a just the product development lifecycle, I think FDA expects this planned prior change management plan or change control plan now is a thing. They expect you to be able to show how you can, update your model in the field, roll it back. How do you do integrity checks? And then the biggest thing which I think your company provides that tool, is what does that continuous monitoring look like? I think now with the AI, they're gonna expect you to, continuously monitor everything. So you need to have tools and automations to help you do that. So that's the two aspects. And I think from the outside coming in, I think you need to just think of it as yet another attack surface that you need
Right.
to deal with that.
Yeah, that's how I always think. I mean, it's just another piece of it, and it's the same things that you do to protect against everything else, the internet in general.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
transparency, visibility, proactivity, all those things. It's the same with AI. Like, I don't think companies should avoid putting AI in just because it's gonna be a vulnerability. I think it's a great tool, and it's just doing it securely, just like everything else. So, I guess kind of as closing up, maybe just one piece of advice you have. We're kinda closing out 2025, moving into 2026. Do you have any advice for companies either on the journey, considering it for the first time, or not really sure what to do next for their connected devices or their med devices?
yeah. That's I thought about several things on that. And if it's just one thing, I would say, treat cybersecurity as a safety attribute. Basically maintain everything about the product needs to be maintained as an attribute, just like any other attribute of a product. And with that in mind, you want to make sure that you continuously, monitor your SBOM. If you can automate that, that'd be great. You make sure that you're tracing your all your controls all the way from design to VNV and all of that, and then you have a life cycle of how you manage vulnerability in your product. Just think about that as a continuum.
Madison, what about you?
I think one thing Farshad and I talked about is building design controls for connected devices into a product from day one. Obviously, like we talked about, there are companies who are well past that point, and that's okay. And I think for those companies, like there is hope, and you can go back and we can help build in some of those processes so that as the iterations continue and the product continues to develop, those are built in then from that point on. So just yeah, really taking a proactive approach and not being scared of this, because there are really simple ways to start having these conversations internally. Like you said, Valentina, it can be a tabletop conversation of getting the minds together and thinking through some of these things. So yeah, just being proactive and yeah, and I guess building in some of these practices as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I like that you kind of mentioned both sides. Like it's never too early or too late. Like wherever you're at, we can come in and help all of us.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think I guess mine would be kind of like you said, don't get scared. Like cybersecurity compliance, I think are two of the most like scary looking things that are really not as complicated as they sound or as they are to, the audience. So don't get overwhelmed. If anything we said today is even feels like so unobtainable or so crazy, like that's why we're here, is to break that down and like we can take that stress off your plate. So don't get overwhelmed by it. Ignorance is not bliss in cybersecurity. So don't put your head in the sand. The FDA will pull your head out and make you look at it. So, it's better to just start having these conversations. So I really appreciate you guys coming on today. And I think obviously there's so much more we could dive into, and maybe we do at a future point into actual vulnerabilities and things like that. But I think this was a great starting point of the conversation. And I'm going to link both of your information. So please, everyone listening, if you have any questions on this or just want to start the conversation, please reach out to Blue Sages, Red Century, comment on the podcast, anything if you have questions. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much, Valentina.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.